first starting with a presentation on the gender gap, so the technology gender gap that we have in Tanzania. And then in the end, maybe we can move the discussion, okay, so what does this impact in the end when it comes to things like gender diagnosis and the like. So the title of the presentation is the Tech Gender Gap. And next. So what does tech gender gap mean? So I'm very happy that today is Women's Day, but if I look at the people who are attending here, at least there's a mix, right? So we should say thank you to all the young men for joining us today to celebrate together Women's Day. So thank you so much for coming. So when we talk about the tech gender gap, right? So gender includes both males and female. So this is specifically the gap that we have when it comes to using technology, but also in developing technology or creating technological solutions in terms of males and female. So I was very scared here when Dr. Albina started with statistics, because I know I have a slide on statistics and I have to make sure that it's the correct one, so you can verify for me. So this is some statistics on mobile and internet usage in Africa in general. So as you can see, generally the dark blue represents the men and the light blue represents the women. So if you look across Africa, you can see almost there is a difference when it comes to men and women. And if we go to the next slide, here we try to zoom into the Tanzanian statistics, and we can see that for access to phones, we have a difference of 86% to 77%. But when it comes to internet, it's even lower. So we have something like 35 to 17%. And this is, you know, very low amount of women who are actually accessing internet devices. Now, if we go next. So this is some statistics of women in education. So the slide at the, or the slab at the bottom represents a percentage of women who are in primary education. So if you click next, yeah, you can see that we have about 50% in primary school, and in Tanzania now we have a lot of movement in getting everybody to school, and we have free education, and we see that it's working, right? So in the primary level, at least we have almost a 50% of women and men. Now, if you go next again, we see that that becomes smaller, right? So we go to secondary schools, and this is smaller in science subjects, right? So science, technology, education, and engineering and mathematics. That's where we have much smaller amount of women. And then if we go next and think about higher learning institutions like university and colleges, there the percent is even much smaller. So we have around 24% of women in higher education in the science subjects. So I think our experience here at KICT is a little bit better, where we are now approaching maybe 30%, but you can see it's still low. We want to reach a place where we are at least 50% even in higher education. So if we go next again, so we know that for you to be able to take STEM subjects, you need to pass mathematics and probably physics. So for example, if you want to do anything in computer science, you need to have a good pass in mathematics and in physics. So if we look at the percent of male and females in passing math and physics, we can see that the female percentage is still low. So for mathematics, we have about 15.9%, and for physics around 34.9%. So this is also what leads to that when we come to universities, we have much few women because we have a much smaller pool to pick from in the university. Next. Yes, so now this, you know, it's like a rolling ball, right? It keeps going until in work. We have few women in universities. Obviously, we have few women when it comes to the working area. So now we have about 15 to 27%, and this is statistics from EU. So I couldn't find statistics on women working in ICT in Tanzania. That is something we can ask Dr. Albina to help us with. So I took roughly from the EU perspective, but I think you get the point, right? So if you have way fewer women who are in university, it means in the workforce, even if you tell this employer to hire more, where are they going to get these women, right? So the gap just keeps increasing and increasing the higher you go until you go to the working or to the workforce. Next. So then this, we know that there's a gap in people who are taking science subjects, which implies also people taking computer science. But what we need to ask ourselves, so what, yeah? But if there is a gap and nothing is wrong, maybe we should not care, right? Because if everything is working smoothly, the percentage of women who are in the workforce or who are taking science subjects shouldn't matter, right? So what I try to show you next is the impact of us being underrepresented, right? Next. So this is a very famous example I like to give, and I think if someone has heard this presentation, maybe they're now tired of the example, yeah? So it's the seatbelt example, and it says that women are 47% more likely to be seriously injured and 17% more likely to die than men in a similar car accident. So if me and my husband get into a car accident, the same car accident, I have 47% more chance to be seriously injured, and I even have 17% more chance to die than the man. And if you think about why should that be the case, and if you go to the next slide, you can see it's because of the seatbelt, right? So the seatbelt was invented a long time ago, maybe about 40 or even more years back. But most of the testing is tested using these dummies, like the toys, but they always make them to look like men, right? They're designed in the physique of a man. So if you look there, you see that there is no doll with any boobs, right? And nobody is pregnant in this picture, right? So you test, and if you test here, you can say that the seatbelt is safe. But then when a person comes to use it and they're built slightly different, then it becomes a hazard because maybe it doesn't hold them as much if they're in an accident. Or maybe it, cuts you because you're much shorter or much smaller compared to the body that was used to test this. So if we go to the next slide again. So that was the seatbelt example. It's a little bit extreme, but you can see that it's something that is important and it's a hazard, right? It's a safety concern. And I think there was a lot of noise about this, and maybe around 2018 or 19, some people in Sweden started to test with pregnant dummies, and even though they only do this in terms of simulations because they say, yeah, it's expensive to make a new kinds of dummies, yeah? So that's a very general example. So how about ICT in this field that we all know and love so much? So how does the gap between men and women impact ICT? So next. So if we look at health apps, right? We have had cases of health apps recommending wrong diagnosis, right? Next. So this example has some animations on it. So we have a 59-year-old smoker who has chest pain in the middle of the chest. And here the diagnosis was that this person is suffering from depression or panic attack. So the way this app works is that you get the app and then you fill in your symptoms, but also you fill in your demographic information, like your age, your gender, maybe where you live, and if your habits, like if you smoke or you don't smoke. So we can see that in the first example, we have this 59-year-old smoker who has chest pain in the center of the chest, and then the app recommends that, okay, maybe you have depression or heart attack. And then in the next example, we have or panic attack. The next example, we have the same. It's a 59-year-old smoker with chest pain. And here, the recommendation is that you have a heart attack. Now you can see the only difference between the two is that the first one is female and the second one is male. Obviously, the app uses some kind of AI behind it to be able to match the symptoms with what kind of diagnosis to give. And the problem with this kind of suggestions is that if you are diagnosed with depression or panic attack, the treatment is maybe you need to rest more, you need to relax, you need to sit. But if you're diagnosed with a heart attack, the response is go to the hospital now or even call an ambulance, right? So if you are a woman and you're misdiagnosed that you're supposed to be having a heart attack and someone tells you you're having a panic attack, this is a problem, right? So we have impacts like this that are caused by the biasness in the data that we use to train our models. So if we go next. Yes, this is another very famous example that you have an AI-based application for doing translation, right? And it's always, whenever you type something like doctor, it will interpret with a he or man, because most of the data that is filled in the application or that is used to train the model assumes that the doctor is always the male, right? Maybe that's how it's like. But this is not something we want the machine to learn, right? Because it's learning the biasness that we also have. And whenever you type nurse, it will assume that the nurse is a female, but this is biasness that is caused from the data that we have. If we go next. So here is another example of the forgotten population. I think Dr. Albina started by saying, for example, in Tanzania, women are the majority, right? But here is an example from iPhone. I think iPhone is US-based, but maybe if we look at the population, maybe the number of female vs men might be the same. So iPhone released the first iPhone 6, which had a health app that was supposed to have everything to do with health-related tracking within the human body. So you could, I think they marketed as something like, you can track everything important in your body. So you can track the steps that you walk, you can track your heart rate, maybe your weight, and you know, many things that you can track. But the only thing that this health app didn't have was a period tracker, right? And this means that somebody somewhere forgot 50% of the world, right? And made a decision that this is not an important thing to track. While if you ask any woman, what do you want to track? They will say that I want to be able to track my period every month, right? So this is just some examples of underrepresentation when it comes to development of the application. So maybe we use these applications, but if we are not involved when developing them, then we end up with applications that did not think about us when creating the applications. Next. Yes, I think this is the last example again. So this is an example of a virtual reality glasses where you wear them and then you're supposed to be in this virtual world and see them. So this paper is called Virtual Reality is Sexist, but it does not have to be. So the problem with this headset is that they need to be able to align with the distance between your eyeballs, right? So the distance between this part, right, like this, it needs to align with the headset. So what happened is that they made this headset to be very big because they tested them on heads of men, which are a little bit bigger and maybe wider than females, to an extent that if female testers used them, they got bad reaction from it. Like they had what's that, nausea, and they wanted to vomit because, you know, it's not, you don't have this distance aligned. So you can see this is another mistake, I would say, but that comes from underrepresentation of women during the developing of such gadgets. Next. Yes, so in general, what I'm getting at is that whenever you have underrepresentation of any population, in this case we are talking underrepresentation of females in technology, then you end up with products that are biased, right? They can be biased products, biased services, biased policies, just because you didn't involve a certain population when doing the development. Next. So, like I said, I'm not an expert in health. I'm more of a computer scientist, but I want to try to bring this discussion towards the impact of underrepresentation or the impact of biasness in the data and how it can lead to a misdiagnosis or what is the impact in health diagnostics. So there is a lot of studies that are showing that there can be misdiagnosis of females and males due to different in symptoms. So for the same disease, the two genders could show different symptoms. So we want, if we are doing diagnosis apps or if we are doing any technology that will do some kind of diagnosis, then we want this technology to be aware of these differences in gender so that it's able to suggest the right thing. But also there could be different ways in which women express themselves. So I've seen some papers where they say, you know, women are associated more with complaining and, you know, exaggerating small things, but sometimes the doctor needs to say, okay, I shouldn't just assume this person is exaggerating the symptoms. I should order the same test, you know, I would have ordered if a man was coming to the hospital. And of course, for data scientists or aspiring data scientists, the biggest thing that we can deal with is biasness in the data that is collected from clinical research, right? So if you're using your data to try and predict something that is health related, you should really look at the data and see how it's representing both the genders, right? Because you might end up with an algorithm that is not balanced or that is biased in a way that can cause a misdiagnosis that could be fatal to someone, okay? Next. So what should we do? So this is the question. So what can we do to improve the current situation? And here I have pointers for what we can do in general and maybe also something to do with the diagnosis in the health sector. So if we look at the long-term plan, and next, we can see that we have this problem at the top, but it really comes from the bottom, right? We have very few women at the top, but because we're also losing them on the way because they're not getting into STEM subjects. So I'm signaled for time. I will try to be very quick. So let us try to motivate young girls from an early stage and motivate them to take science subjects. Because if we realize that we want them at the university but never did any motivation, then we realize at university we don't have any pool to select from. And of course, we should consider both genders when we are formulating ICT policies, but most of all, collect gender disaggregated data. So when you're making decisions, make sure you have this gender concept entered. And for now, I will end here because Mahadia is standing and I will not talk anymore.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salome. Clearly, you have seen what could happen if there is bias in the in the health sector. So we could be misdiagnosed, but also it imposes safety. We have even seen in the test birds in the seatbelt examples. So clearly we need to break the bias, and Salome suggested so many points. One, which was the last, we need to collect gender disaggregated data so that we can have informed diagnosis on both men and women. But the most important thing, we need to work on creating a pool or a pipeline of future female data scientists, because the biasness does not only end at the data point, even on how we think, etc. So we need the voices of both men and women while designing the algorithm, so both genders are being represented. So thank you so much, Dr. Salome. So because of the interest of time, for Salome, we will only take one question. Philomena, do we have question online?
No, we don't, Mahadia.
On the stage, do we have any question for Dr. Salome? Okay.
Thank you, Doctor, for nice presentation. I wish to know what do you think can be done to bridge the gap in gender, to bridge the gender gap in health data. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So I think if we talk about health data, it's something that is very wide, right? So if we think about how can we actually bridge the gap in the health data. So I would say, first we need to be able to collect data from the gender that does not have enough data, which is the female gender, right? And of course, whenever you do a study that collects data that is going to be used for health diagnostics, it's nice, or it's recommended that you're aware of the gender differences, and therefore you should aim for having balanced set of data points where you get the data. So if you're doing some trial on something and then you need to involve both genders instead of only maybe focusing on collecting data from men only, maybe you should do men and women. And maybe instead of focusing on collecting from females only, you should do both so that you have data that is balanced in terms of the gender.
Thank you, Dr. Salome. Back to you, Philomena.
We have a question from one of the audience. Dr. Matagoro, can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate on the tech gender gap. I'm not sure if WITS is working towards addressing the tech gender gap, because I understand the cost of caused by the gender gap, and I could also be happy to hear from Salome what she's doing to contribute in addressing the gender gap as she has presented, especially on the data science and also artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the nice and tricky question. But I'm a lecturer in computer science, so I teach computer science in general, and also sometimes I teach the data science. So what I am trying to do now is just to first of all show the impact of this tech gender gap with some data, right? So we are working on some experiments where we give a certain task to students, and we try to say, okay, we give this task to students without telling them anything about gender, right? For example, we had an experiment where we did requirements for a system, right, an app for navigation, and we told the students, okay, here is the app that we want to build, something to help you navigate the university campus. What kind of requirements are important? And then they would write them down. And then we would take a few minutes and then do some kind of gender sensitization, something like the presentation I did, to say, maybe if you think about the different genders, you think differently about your requirements. And then we give them another round, and then they do the same thing, right? And then you can see that it's like they open their minds, yeah? And you open their minds to this unconscious biasness that, by the way, both females and males, we have this. So that if you do this sensitization, it helps people think about the gender gap when they're doing the products, and maybe even though they cannot recruit 20 females at once, but maybe they can listen to the two that they have in the team to get the perspective of the other gender. So in short, what we are doing now is trying to let people know that they have this biasness that is inbuilt, and if you don't think about it, it's going to be implied into your product. And then this helps them to think about this when they do the development. And of course, I think there's other initiatives at the universities with encouraging young females to join the computer science tracks as well.
Thank you, Salome. Philomena, for... Yeah, okay, so we have one comment from Dr. Chua, and then Philomena, you'll go for next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me chip in on what Dr. Salome has just said. To me, I find the findings of this kind of research is very important. So really what is required now is for Dr. Philomena or the dLab to join with the government now, because this kind of findings is really very important in decision making. So this kind of information, it will complement whatever is available to the responsible ministry or even to the National Bureau of Statistics, where we can now call upon the users, the big users, to use these few findings that you got from whatever the students is doing. So, and I welcome this. It's really very important. Yes.
Thank you so much. I know there are a lot of questions and hands here in Tanzania, and also I know we have questions. I know we have a lot of questions here in Tanzania, but also we have a lot of questions online.